Yes, we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. We will all be there in line as day is dawning. There's no better man we know, though you hunt him high and low. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Oh, each and every one of us has got the right to vote, and we're going to exercise it, you can bet your bottom note. We're going to get up early to get there by rail or boat, and we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Yes, we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. We will all be there in line as day is dawning. There's no better man we know, though you hunt him high and low. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Just take a look at Charlie, if across him you should stray, or study up his picture if he doesn't come your way. There's a face that's good and genial, and as honest as the day. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Yes, well, by now you know the chorus, so sing along. Vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. We will all be there in line as day is dawning. There's no better man we know, though you hunt him high and low. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. He'll call the bluff of Johnny Bull, who wants to rule the sea, and you'll find he won't be jollied by the man from Germany. He'll plant the old flag higher, he's the man for you and me. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Yes, we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. We will all be there in line as day is dawning. There's no better man we know, though you hunt him high and low. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. He'll lift the hands of Lazarus, our dinner pails he'll fill. He believes a bit in tariffs to keep Europe from the till. He loves the hum of industry, he'll boost up every mill. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. Yes, we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. We will all be there in line as day is dawning. There's no better man we know, though you hunt him high and low. So we'll vote for Charlie Hughes election morning. It was a 1916 campaign song for the Hughes campaign that was published October 31st, 1916 in the Poughkeepsie Eagle. And some of you have heard my talks before, so I'll keep the general election talk to a minimum. But for those of you who haven't been to one of my talks before, Hughes was born in Glens Falls. His birth home was over on Maple Street. It was on Maple Street and has since been moved to Center Street. He was New York governor, and as New York governor, he spearheaded the purchase of many acres of Adirondack forest land, and he spearheaded the purchase of the land around the springs in Saratoga that is now Saratoga State Park, amongst many, many other things he did as governor. Then he served on the U.S. Supreme Court. He stepped down from the Supreme Court in 1916 to run for president. Narrowly lost. I like to say to people that a few thousand votes difference in California and we'd have a presidential library in Glens Falls today. And I'm thinking maybe we should start the almost presidential library. Then he served as Secretary of State in the cabinets of Harding and Coolidge, and then he was U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice, among many, many other things he did in his life. And
Tonight will be focused mostly on the 1916 election, campaign songs, slogans, poetry, and cheers. And this next song is called Heavy Frost in the West by John C. Keefe. And it was originally published in the New York World. And Hughes had several nicknames that people put upon him. One was the animated feather duster, which is the topic of the book, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But he also was called the human icicle because he had a reputation for being kind of quiet and emotionless in public generally. And it was really kind of a misnomer because those who knew him knew that he had a very warm heart and a jovial character. Amongst those that knew him well were newspaper reporters. And there's a great story about when he was traveling back by train on one of his governor's campaigns that Hughes had a sleeping car booked, and the reporters were supposed to have sleeping cars booked, and somehow the train got their reservations mixed up, and they all had to ride coach. So Hughes said, if the reporters are going to ride coach, I'm going to ride coach. And he sat up all night and talked with the reporters in the car on the way back. His family also knew him to be a very warm-hearted person. And at family dinners for entertainment, he used to mimic Calvin Coolidge. Now, I don't know for sure what Calvin Coolidge thought about it, but Calvin Coolidge's wife used to mimic Calvin at their dinner time, and Calvin got a great chuckle out of it. So I think he would have probably gotten a great chuckle out of Hughes mimicking him. And Phil Jessen in the back here has been working on portraying Hughes, and the challenge for him, and you all be my witnesses, is if he can portray Hughes mimicking Calvin Coolidge. So this is Heavy Frost in the West. And Hughes' personality was actually very much different than what this song portrays. Why did you stop the ice, mother? The iceman left he stay. This is not a heavy price, mother. The iceman made us pay. My child, no cake we need to take, for Hughes is bound this way. Forecast of heavy frost, mother, I read within the news. Oh, will our cross be lost, mother, through frigorific news? The weather's here, but means, my dear, the coming year of Hughes. Why does the waiting crowd, mother, its various ears enfold? Or may I say enshroud, mother, with earmuffs new and old? Since they must hear a Hughes speech fear, they guard against the cold. Why do they light the fire, mother, so early in the fall? The heat you so desire, mother, may melt our furnace wall. This fire I built to keep unchilled when Hughes is in our home. I'll fill the stove with stacks, mother, of coal extremely hard, and stuff window cracks, mother, so that hot air is barred. Here comes the sure Hughes temperature, and we must be on our guard. And Hughes actually brought a lot of warmth to the West on his campaign tour, two campaign tours of the West. And he was the first presidential candidate that had his wife travel with him. And she traveled all throughout the West with him and throughout New York, and would make wave to the crowds and hand out campaign buttons, and people loved the fact that he had his wife traveling with him. And also, not traveling with him, but traveling on his behalf, were the Hughesettes, a women's campaign team that went from coast to coast by train and campaigned for Hughes. And now Hughes was the first Republican presidential candidate to have a women's campaign team. And Hughes had come out and personally endorsed the national suffrage amendment. The Democratic and the Republican campaigns and their platforms had called for each state to do it state by state. But Hughes endorsed the nationwide suffrage amendment, and even after the election he continued to advocate for women's suffrage, and later in life made speeches and advocated on behalf of building endowments for women's colleges. And Hughes had another distinction. I got my notes in the wrong piles here. Hang on a second. Hughes had another distinction. He was the last political candidate from a major political party that had whiskers. And his vice president, Charles Fairbanks, also had whiskers. So if whiskers were a good sign, they had a double omen there. And there's what I'm looking for. And Charles Fairbanks, who was a senator from Indiana and had been vice president under Roosevelt, was one of those that was nominated along with Hughes on the first ballot for president. And Hughes won on the third ballot. And the interesting thing about Hughes is he never campaigned for president. He did not allow his name to be entered into any primaries. And they nominated him not knowing for certain whether he would accept the nomination. And Representative Will R. Wood of Indiana, when he nominated Fairbanks of Indiana at the convention in Chicago, the closing lines of his speech were, "Nominate Fairbanks. Give us this giant oak from Indiana for our nominee, and you will have discharged your full duty to your country and to the Republican Party." Now, Fairbanks was an Ohio native, and so at the close of that speech, the Ohio delegation all stood up in the convention hall and sang, "He is from Ohio. He was born in Ohio. He is from Ohio, the greatest state in the land." They didn't want Indiana to get all the credit. Now, Hughes, in his campaign tour, he made a speech at the Mormon Tabernacle in Utah. It was the only building in Utah large enough to hold the crowds that they expected. And so his local supporters went to the Mormon Tabernacle higher-ups and said, "Can we have a campaign rally here?" And they did their thinking, and they said, "Well, you can have a campaign rally as long as it is known that if Woodrow Wilson wants to have a campaign rally, he can use the building too. You know, equal access, much like Crandall Public Library." And now, what you don't know from that is that Woodrow Wilson was not holding campaign rallies. He took what they call kind of a rose garden approach, and he stayed at the White House and only made a couple speeches. But the Democrats did send out someone around, particularly around the West, on his behalf. And J. Senator J. Hiram Smith, who was a candidate that had, you guessed it, a beard. And wherever Hughes went, Jay Hamilton would show up the next day and make a speech. And Frederick M. Davenport, who was a staff correspondent for the Outlook magazine, was traveling with the Hughes campaign. And when they got to Utah, there was a lot of talk about prohibition. And in his campaign coverage, Mr. Davenport shared this prohibition song that was being sung around Utah at the time.
It's a long way to San Francisco. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to San Francisco, to the wettest town I know. Then goodbye, Tom and Jerry, farewell, rock and ride. It's a long way to San Francisco when Utah goes dry.
And this next song is not a campaign song, but it's from 1916, and I just couldn't leave it out of the program. In 1916, the Post-Star had a limericks editor. And I tried to get Ken Tingley to bring the job back. I would have stayed on another 20 years if they would have let me be the limericks editor. And they had regular contests where people would send into the Post-Star, they would write limericks about the value of Post-Star classified advertising. And whoever got their limericks published in the paper would win a prize. And so this was one that seemed to be kind of interesting.
Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of gold. How did he get it? This is what he told. I just got a little ad in the paper called Post-Star. Sold a gallon of gasoline and threw it in the car.
Now, I haven't been able to find the lyrics and music to too many of Woodrow Wilson's campaign songs, but I did find some of the titles. And bear in mind, the three big issues in 1916 will sound very contemporary today. International security, as the United States decided whether to go into World War I or not. Global trade, and relations with Mexico. And there was even talk of building a quote-unquote stout fence along the Mexican border. And one Western New York newspaper wrote an editorial that it would be really great if some enterprising politician could come up with a way to make the Mexicans pay for the border security. So, I'm not sure if a current politician who won't be named because whether you like him or don't like him, his name stirs up heated emotions. I'm not sure if he's a student of history or if it's just coincidence. But Woodrow Wilson, some of his campaign songs were, one was, I think we've got another Washington, and Wilson is his name. And another one by Coleman Goetz and Jack Stern was, we're going to celebrate the end of the war in ragtime. Be sure that Woodrow Wilson leads the band. And there was a Democratic Party song in 1916 that was called, Go Right Along, Mr. Wilson, We're All For You Strong, by A. Seymour Brown. Go right along, Mr. Wilson, we're all for you strong. You speak for us as a nation, and we're for the nation, right or wrong. Wilson knows the sorrows of war, and he's trying to spare us the pain. But even he may have to call on you, and so prepare to play your part. Polish your gun as you pray for peace, and say to him with all your heart, go right along, Mr. Wilson. We're all for you strong. And the Democratic campaign slogan was, he kept us out of war. And of course, those of us who know history know that he didn't keep us out of war. And one of his campaign advisors in the memoir a few years later wrote that, it's important to know, judge by the tense of that statement. He kept us out of war. And the race became very much centered around the war. The Democratic platform was that Hughes will lead us into war, and Hughes said that war should be a last resort, but we needed military preparedness. And we know from the rest of the story that we did go to World War I, and we're marking the 100th anniversary of that now, and many people in our area were killed in that war. And on the economy, the tariff was another big issue between them. Wilson was pretty much anti-tariff, and he said the economy is going good right now. Hughes said the economy is going good right now because it's a war economy, which is a false economy. And that the reason our economy is so strong is because our manufacturers are exporting things to Europe, where their manufacturing has been shuttered because of the war. And Hughes said that we need to look into the future, and we need to prepare for the economy for after the war. And he felt that the tariff was important to being competitive after the war. Now, in the 1916 presidential campaign, obviously they didn't have television yet. They didn't have radio yet. So they did not have attack ads, but they had attack poetry. And here's a poem called Judge Charles Evans Hughes Soliloquy by Charles Presley Simulton, and it was published in the Carson City Daily Appeal of Nevada on October 9th, 1916. Be frank to me. Don't be upset. What really are your views on issues which must soon be met? Charles Evans said to Hughes. My views you'd not divulge, disclose to living or to dead, but what they are, God only knows, Judge Hughes to Evans said. Said Lodge to Henry, he's our man, Judge Hughes through thick and thin, for he's a true Republican, he's anything to win. And the next one's called The Bobbin Ran Out, and it was published in the Monet Times of Monet, Maryland, November 3rd, 1916. At the sewing machine, a woman sat down, and there she sits on the hem of a gown. The needle obediently followed his route long after the bobbin gave out. There's Charles Evans Hughes. He foams and he spews. He tries to please Teddy in all that he does. He's the greatest fault finder that's going about. But a blind man could see that his bobbins run out. It's brains versus whiskers. Now which will you choose? You may have peace with Wilson or war with Hughes. When the votes are all counted, we'll surely find out that Woodrow's still sewing, his bobbins not run out. And then now one that praises Hughes. And this was published in the Dickinson Press of Stark County, North Dakota on November 25th, 1916. And it was reported that Adam A. LaFleur, the big man of the bustling little inland city of LaFleur, North Dakota, had sent this poem that he had written during the campaign to North Dakota Governor Louis Benjamin Hanna. And Hanna shared the poem with Hughes, and Hughes wrote a letter to LaFleur thanking him for writing it. Now, the same process would happen today, but it'd go a little bit quicker on Facebook than through the mail. Charles Evans Hughes, we want you where? And you bet we'll get you there, to Washington, D.C. Get up and pack your grip. Get ready to take a trip to Washington, D.C. Then you'll make them treat us right. We know that you're not too proud to fight, and see that we prepare. And after your inauguration, none of Roosevelt's dictation. As you know, Teddy's a bear. We're getting tired of reading notes. Hughes will have 10 million votes in the USA. So don't forget November, when we'll certainly remember Charles Evans Hughes. And in Glens Falls, we'll always remember Charles Evans Hughes. Now, the Democratic campaign had another slogan, and it was one that was made to kind of lampoon the Republicans. They had a slogan, "Win with Whiskers." Now, the Democratic campaign apparently did not have good memories, because in the 1906 gubernatorial race, William Randolph Hearst, who was the newspaper publisher, who was the Democratic candidate running against Hughes, said in a speech, he got very red in the face, and he said about Hughes, he called him the animated feather duster. And he said it with all the guttural anger that he could muster. And it was supposed to be a rallying cry for his supporters, you know, much like the "lock her up" chant by that other unnamed politician that we said earlier, we're not going to mention his name. Better watch his Twitter feed tomorrow. He might be talking about me. And the kindly reporters turned it around and said, yes, Hughes is a feather duster. He's going to clean out the cobwebs of corruption out of Albany. And so the nickname stuck with Hughes throughout his life, and that's how the title of the book. We have a few campaign cheers from the Hughes campaign. And I see Bernice here. She's involved in a lot of campaigns. I think we ought to bring back campaign cheers and marching bands. You know, whenever I read about politicians 100 years ago, there was always a marching band to greet them at the train, and then they march into town and the bands would play. And boy, you could tell I was in the marching band in high school a few years back. From east and west, from south and north, the same glad south swells loudly forth, Hughes, Fairbanks, and victory. Here's another cheer. Let the stars and stripes wave over the breeze today. A presage of victory for Hughes, we say. The news will flash over the magic wire on the night of the 7th of November. Will blast the hopes and put out the fire of ambition in Woodrow Wilson forever. Now, the news did flash on election night that Hughes had won. All the New York City papers reported it. And the next day, they had to retract that Hughes might not have won. And several days later, in some states, after counting military ballots from the Mexican border, it was determined that Woodrow Wilson did in fact win by a narrow margin. And Woodrow Wilson went to bed that night thinking that he had lost. He got up the next morning, and he was in the bathroom shaving, and his daughter knocked on the door. His daughter knocked on the door to tell him that that it looked like he might have won after all, and he thought she was playing a terrible prank on him. And he said, "Go tell it to the Marines." So one more Hughes cheer. Hurrah for Hughes and Fairbanks too. We're going to see both of them through. Let's try that one all together. Hurrah for Hughes and Fairbanks too. We're going to see both of them through. One more time. Yeah, that was pretty good. But a little more enthusiasm. Dennis, you know how to work up a crowd in a campaign. Help us out here. Hurrah for Hughes and Fairbanks too. We're going to see both of them through.
Hoorah!
One more poem, and this was a poem that was written after the election in 1917, and it was published on a postcard, and it was after Wilson took America into World War I. We are with you, Woodrow, whether peace or whether war. We were with you, hearkening to the era from battlefields afar, when you sought to change the carnage to a peace that would abide. Oh, were we with you, Woodrow Wilson, way betide. We are with you, Woodrow, one hardship, million strong. Fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, be it weary, way and long, of swift and sure to victory, our insistence and might, we are with you in the silence, we are with you in the fight. We are with you, Woodrow. We pledge each heart and mind. You're indeed a valiant leader. We're at need of valiant land. Then red of war or white of peace, neath wide blue tent above, each flag from you finds us with you in loyalty and love. And not only were the people of the nation with Woodrow Wilson, but so was Charles Evans Hughes. And of the many tremendous things about Charles Evans Hughes, and someone asked me recently, they were arranging for me to do a speech. They said, "Can you talk for 45 minutes about Charles Evans Hughes?" I said, "I could talk for 45 hours about Charles Evans Hughes." But one of the things that I most admire about him is his political civility. He never engaged in personal attacks against other candidates. And he always said, we can talk about the issues and without defaming one another. And this is a piece I wrote for, I post regularly on medium.com, which is you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all those things. Well, medium.com is a relatively new social networking where you can share, posts of medium length as opposed to short length. And if you go medium.com, then you type in Maury Thompson, you'll find I've got about 83 posts up there so far about some about Hughes, some about regional history, a couple about current politics. President Wilson took the United States into World War I just months after he won re-election, using a campaign slogan, "He kept us out of war." Charles Evans Hughes, the Republican Wilson narrowly defeated, was among the vocal supporters of Wilson's war declaration. "We are all Americans, standing loyally behind President Wilson, on whom the great responsibility rests," Hughes said, according to a March 14, 1917 report in the Pulaski Democrat. "The exigency of no nation can fix the limit of American rights." Some Republican newspaper editors pounced on the turn events as an opportunity to take partisan jabs at Wilson. "Bet you these Western women and male mollycoddles now wish they had voted for Charles Evans Hughes," the Brockport Republican editorialized. on February 9th, 1917. Wilson's narrow victory in California, which gave the Democrat a majority in the Electoral College, was attributed in part to votes from pacifists, including California women voting in the presidential election. Hughes, during the campaign, said the military should be prepared, if necessary, to enter the war as a last resort. Hughes let bygones be bygones after the election and rallied support for the administration's war effort. Speaking at the annual dinner of the New York alumni of Brown University, Hughes urged every loyal American, regardless of political affiliation, to support the administration in this solemn hour, the Associated Press reported on February 1st, 1917. The audience spontaneously stood up and sang the Star-Spangled Banner. Hughes continued his support of the president's war strategy as the war stretched on. Speaking at a meeting of the St. David's Society in New York City on March 2nd, 1918, Hughes said Wilson should resist critics who suggested the United States negotiate a settlement with Germany instead of insisting on surrender. A negotiated settlement could leave Germany able to resume its militarism, Hughes suggested. After all, without regard to party, behind the President of the United States in his effort for the vigorous prosecution of the war, Hughes said, everyone who talks of a negotiated peace at this time is playing the game of Germany. Hughes demonstrated patriotism during World War I by serving as chairman of a district draft board in New York City and raising funds for various humanitarian relief efforts. Hughes was Toastmaster at a dinner for President Wilson that about 600 people attended, the Journal and Republican Global Times reported on November 8, 1917. Hughes' words and actions brought praise from newspaper editors. His expression about standing loyally behind the president in time of national exigency demonstrates that Charles Evans Hughes is 100% American, the Altamont Enterprise reported on February 23, 1917. Charles Evans Hughes says that whatever comes, the people of the United States should be united in standing by the policies of the president, the Leroy Courier editorialized in February 1970. Nobody could have done it better than Charles Evans Hughes. Nobody could have expressed in fewer or stronger words the attitude of the American people toward the president today. The Pulaski Democrat editorialized on March 14, 1917. Hughes' words and actions were consistent with his reputation for political civility as New York governor from 1907 to October 1910, and as the 1916 Republican presidential candidate when he resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court to accept the presidential nomination he had not sought. But we are all friends, however divided politically. I do not desire to speak of those who disagreed with me in the slightest disrespect, Hughes said in a September 1916 campaign speech at Plattsburgh, New York. If the argument is sound, it will carry without any suggestion of personal enmity. The political civility after the 1916 presidential election flowed in both directions. Wilson, in 1918, appointed Hughes to head a federal investigation into price gouging and corruption among aviation defense contractors. Brown University President William H.P. Fonts, in commencement remarks in May 1918, praised the appointment as an example of how this war has knit the various factions of the world together. On November 12, 1918, Hughes was in the audience and applauded fervently when Wilson outlined to Congress the terms of the armistice, the Daily Capital Journal of Salem, Oregon, reported that evening. And what is interesting about that is that Hughes, at the time, was the leader of one of the large prominent Republican organizations in New York City. And he separated out what was good for the country from what was good for the party. Now, when the midterm elections came up, some of the Democrats said, Mr. Hughes, you and your Republicans should not contest Democratic seats because that would be showing dishonor to the president in a time of war. And Hughes said, no. He said, we will contest seats and we will bring out issues that need to be brought out, and all the while we will show respect for the president and support for his war effort, and we will be civil. And Hughes, when Wilson was on his deathbed, Hughes and his wife went to visit Mr. Wilson, President Wilson. And after Wilson died, Hughes served on the committee that raised money to build a monument to Wilson.
Wow.
Now, could you picture today any defeated candidate raising money to build a monument to? So that shows you what kind of man. And one real great Woodrow Wilson story that's not really part of this, but it's a great story. And if it's a great story, why not tell it? After Woodrow Wilson had his stroke, the Senate sent a delegation over to the White House to meet with him, and their job was to determine whether he was fit to continue serving as president. When they got up to leave, one of the Republicans who had been an antagonist to Wilson said, "Mr. Wilson, Mr. President, we're praying for you." And Wilson turned and he said, "Which way?" So tonight is a celebration. It's a celebration of the completion of the animated feather duster. And about 10 years ago, it would be in this room. I was at a Crandall Public Library book sale, and I picked up a book from the 1920s written by Warren Moscow, a reporter about the history of New York politics. And in that book was some information about Hughes. And I wrote a column based on that in the Post-Star. And the next day my phone rang at the Post-Star. And Joyce, would you raise your hand? Joyce Thompson, who's in the back, called me on the phone and said, "Do you know who Charles Evans Hughes is?" And she loaned me a copy of Charles Evans Hughes' autobiographical notes. And I've been reading, researching, writing, and speaking about Hughes for 10 years and plan to do it for the rest of my life. And but you couldn't wait for the rest of my life for the book to come out. So this book is a short book. It's a narrow focused book. When I wrote for the Post-Star for many years, Ken Tingley every now and then would come around and give all the reporters a list of 5 things that make great news stories. And one of the things on those lists is, what's everybody talking about? If everybody's talking about it, it makes a great news story. And as I researched about Hughes, I found that reporters were always writing about his whiskers. And people were always talking about his whiskers. And at first I thought it was going to be a magazine article. And then when I had 80 sources, I said, this is too much for a magazine article. So that's the book. It's available. It'll be for sale after the talk for $12. And I was delighted to have Kate Elson Avon from Advocate work with me on this project. And I'm going to ask her to come up and say a few words about the book.
How lucky Glens Falls is to have a historian like Maury, right? Does this guy know his stuff? Yeah. I just have to say how impressed I am with the depth of Maury's knowledge on Charles Evans Hughes. I mean, I don't think I know that much about anything. Never mind, something like that. Maury, can I have?
Yes.
Maury had a vision. Maury knew exactly how he wanted the book to be laid out. He knew just how he wanted the cover to be. I just brought his ideas to life. There are some really fun little bits in here. Here are all the bearded presidential candidates from 1859 to 1916. All this stuff was Maury's idea. There's fun facts and photos in here. You'll see some little breakout things like this. Again, all Maury's ideas. Just I was the hands and he was the brain. So it was really enlightening to work on this project. You may be surprised to learn that I didn't have much in-depth knowledge of Charles Evans Hughes' beard. But I do now. Boy, I couldn't speak on it like that, but I mean, it's actually surprising as you read this book, you'll realize it really actually is about Charles Evans Hughes' beard. Like, I mean, you might think to yourself, is there really that much? There is. This whole book is about Charles Evans Hughes. There's a lot to say about it. And the reporters had a lot to say about it. And you'll see there was this interesting relationship between the reporters and Charles Evans Hughes. And I think that is, there's some correlation about this reporter and this topic that goes along with that. Maury was a delight to work with, and he really walked me through the process of ISBN numbers and registering with Library of Congress and all of that too. So that was enlightening, and I learned a lot from working with him, not only about Charles Evans Hughes' beard, but about the process of putting a book together. And I am just delighted that he chose me. And stay tuned for the ebook release. Let's all support Maury and buy all these books up, huh? Sure enough.
Yeah, if you know someone that's looking for a copy and they weren't able to make it tonight, they are available at the Chapman Historical Museum in their gift shop.
Okay.
And at Made in Upstate New York store at the Shirt Factory. And if people are from outside the area, and certainly they can come here and take a vacation, and buy a book. Or if they don't have any gas in their car, they can buy it at my eBay store, which is Maury518 on eBay. And later this summer, we'll have an ebook version available on Amazon Kindle, just as soon as we can get that put together. Tonight is also a celebration of the next project. And Caitlin Stedman and I are happy to announce, Caitlin's with Snarky Aardvark Films of Queensbury, that we're embarking on a documentary about Charles Evans Hughes in the Adirondacks. And it's going to be about a 2-year project, and we're going to be raising some grant money and some business sponsorships and all of those things. A friend of mine in Ticonderoga used to have a saying, art for art's sake, but money for God's sake. And so I'm going to ask Caitlin to come and say a few words about the documentary project.
Hi. So I usually have their job. I'm used to being behind the camera. So our film business is based here in Glens Falls. We do a lot of work with artists and nonprofits, so it's really exciting to kind of delve beneath the surface even more. I feel really honored to have Maury have chosen us to come on board for this project. It's a huge project for us, which is great. It is a feature, so it's going to be about 90 minutes long, which is long for us. We usually work in short format, so that's really exciting. So my dad was actually a history teacher for 30 years in Hudson Falls. And one thing that everybody always loved about him and his class is that he always brought history to life. He was really passionate about it. And I think that's something that Maury does. His passion for it just really sucks you in and gets you so excited. So we do have an email sign-up sheet there if you'd like. If you don't want to give your email, you give an address. We're going to be mailing out some things for updates on the project and how you can get involved. So yeah, I'm just really excited, and I don't do a lot of public speaking, so I'm just going to wrap it up really quick. But thank you all, and thank you to Maury so much for inspiring everybody here tonight.
and watch for details after the first of the year. We're going to be shooting the one of the segments this summer. There'll be 4 segments. One will be on Glens Falls and Hudson Falls, one on Lake Placid and the High Peaks, one on Saratoga, and one on northern Warren County. And we're going to be shooting the Glens Falls, Hudson Falls segment here this fall, and then sometime around after the first of the year, we'll be debuting that segment here at the library. So stay tuned for lots of good news. At this point, I'm going to stop talking. There's snacks in the back. We have books for sale. I'll be signing them. We have some brochures here about Charles Evans Hughes. If you don't have one of those, they're free. Pick one up. And I guess that's it. Thanks everyone for coming.